has put together, and in cooperation with the European Regional Science Organization. We've just finished hearing a rather Catholic and wide-open integration of areas of regional science by Peter Nijkamp. And we have three key speakers that are going to talk a little bit about this theme. The first is going to be Paul Krugman on the new economic geography, divergent returns. The second will be by Professor Robin Wells, the microeconomics of smiling and crying cities. And last but not least, Professor Carlos Moreno on the livability in the 10-minute or 15-minute city, and he will explain that. So I will begin by turning it over to Dr. Krugman. If you don't mind.
So I hope you'll forgive my informal dress, but this seems to be that kind of a session. Okay, so I realized that I'm in the EU right now, and what I would call convergence is actually cohesion, and what the Commission means by convergence is something quite different. But the heck with it, you know what I'm talking about. Those of you who saw when I did the virtual presentation for the Shenzhen meeting, I talked a bit about how the origins of the new economic geography, and noted that even when we started, it had this kind of backward-looking feel to it. I actually called it steampunk. There was a lot of the focus, certainly of my original modeling, and quite a lot of what other people were doing, was on developments that reached well back into the past. The core periphery model, which was my JPE paper from a long time ago now, was the motivating example that I had certainly from U.S. Economic history, was the emergence of the U.S. manufacturing belt. So if you, so I don't know how oh, there we go. I see how to do it. No, I got it. Back one. Hello. There we go. So in the second half of the 19th century, the United States went from being a place that was, well, it wasn't homogeneous, but in any case, what happened was there was a very sharp distinction. A lot of economic activity concentrated in a relatively, I mean, this is still a huge area, but a relatively small fraction of the country. Manufacturing got concentrated, and the question was why, and I tried to go through how changes in technology led to the greater strength of the forces for geographic concentration of industry, and also to a lot of localization of industry. So not just that manufacturing in general concentrated, but that in particular cities, particular locales became the center of industries. And it was, and there are still remnants of that in the United States now. If you happen to drive into New York City from New Jersey through the Lincoln Tunnel, you will pass under this sign, which tells you that there was, I don't know if there's any embroidery left in North New Jersey now, but there was a time when you had these, some of them, it's actually quite cute to read some of the old stuff, the detachable collar and cuff industry in Troy, New York, that sort of thing. Trouble is that has largely gone away, or did go away for at least for a while in the United States and in Europe. If we go back before, like to talk about Alfred Marshall, who did some of the classic writing on localization, and the cutlery industry in Sheffield was his prime example. Well, there isn't a cutlery concentration in Sheffield anymore. Those things have largely gone away. You can still find some of the old-fashioned industrial localization stories playing out in developing countries. China has a large number of industrial clusters that very much resemble the U.S. Industrial clusters of circa 1910, but not so much in advanced countries. And in general, what we saw just at the time that we were developing this economic theory that helped to explain concentration of economic activity, what you actually had was a process of spreading out. Manufacturing spreading away from the manufacturing belt, the old industrial localizations breaking up with factories moving to where costs were lower, and really becoming in many ways a shadow of its former self. There was a paper still some years ago, by Kim and Margot, that used location indices. Actually, I think he was using locational genies the way I did in some of the early work for the United States, and yet there's a clear rise and fall. If you look at manufacturing, the late 19th century saw a lot of industry localization, and which reached its peak somewhere around the 1920s, and then began to diversify. And it used to be very easy to take a look at a particular city anywhere in the advanced world and say, what did that city do for a living? What was its export base? And that became quite hard, trying to figure out, at least the distinctions became subtle. And in general, and also the regional, the sort of macro-regional differences began to disappear. And so I have a favorite, by the way, this is largely US-centered because that's, certainly I know the data better, and I think the data actually kind of are better. It's sort of easier, and because of the US, because of our political structure, we have state level and data that go way back, and Europe now has very good regional data, but you can't easily take that back 100 years, whereas in the United States you actually can. So let me give you my favorite pair of charts, and then try to talk about what it means. So when I talk about, the new economic geography is now, sometimes people call it the old new economic geography. And so now we need the new economic geography. And what I want to get to at the end of this little talk is the possibility of a new economic geography. But let me get there in a minute. So what we have, there are many indicators, but this one is just particularly convenient and stark. We do have estimates of personal income per capita for US states going back all the way, the official ones go all the way back to 1929. And then before that it's much flakier, but that's enough to make my point. Here's the states in the United States between 1929 and 1980. So you have the per capita income that they had in 1929 on the horizontal axis, and the change in the log per capita income from 29 to 80, and you basically don't get relationships this good in economics on anything, right? It's a spectacular example of convergence. Poor states got richer. Everybody got richer, but poor states got richer much faster than rich states. The difference between Mississippi and Massachusetts became much less than it had been in the 1920s. Clear convergence of incomes, and which also meant that in some sense geography mattered less for your standard of living. The difference in how people lived diminished. And we can think about reasons for that. It's probably changes in mode of transportation Railway networks had probably given some advantage to hubs with very dense rail networks and shift to truck transportation, possibly changes in the nature of manufacturing, certainly changes in the way that, if you look at what what a factory looked like in the circa 1900 versus what a factory looks like today, from big hulking buildings to sprawling one-story things, and that has a lot to do with electric motors, and but it means that people wanted to relocate industry to places where there was plenty of space to have sprawling floor plans and so on. So definitely technological changes that led to these forces. The centripetal forces pulling stuff together got weaker. The centrifugal forces making them go apart got stronger, and that led to a lot of convergence in incomes. There's a break point around 1980, which we didn't know about. In writing theoretical papers in 1990, we didn't know that actually everything was about to change. And it's actually a little bit funny, because the normal rule is that just about the time that you recognize an economic phenomenon and write theories about it, that economic phenomenon stops. Basically history hates you. But in this case, it was actually the opposite. We were writing the new economic geography papers while acknowledging that the forces we were writing about seemed to have gotten a lot weaker. And then suddenly they got a lot stronger again. And there was a really distinct breakpoint circa 1980. This is that same chart. There has been no convergence of incomes among U.S. states over the past 45 years. It's in fact, for reasons that I'm still trying to figure out, this shows basically no correlation between starting income and finishing income, but a number of other measures. This may be partially what we're actually seeing may be dampened by the U.S. tax and transfer system, which ends up being a fiscal union that very strongly transfers income from rich regions to poorer regions. And just for the Europeans here, the U.S. has a level of interregional transfer, which is not deliberate, just from the structure of the system that Europe can only dream of. But other indicators show clear divergence among regions. So if we look at, particularly, if we look at education levels, what we see is a very, very clear pattern in which highly educated states, and even better metropolitan areas, but I'm just going to give you some state data, highly educated states increased their educational level more rapidly than less educated states. I would like, I didn't have time to put together a more comprehensive, longer time series, so I just stole a chart from Ed Glaser that makes this point. Percentage of adults with a bachelor's degree, basically a college degree, in 1990, and then he shows the change over the next decade. But this actually applies over at least a 3-decade period, from actually 4-decade period, from roughly 1980 to 2019. I'll talk about 2019. I used 2019, in the earlier chart as well, and the reason for 2019 is that, as you may have noticed, something happened in 2020 that kind of screwed up, a lot of things were, at least very briefly, very disrupted, and one question which will be kind of where I end up is what difference that may have made. But there was a clear divergence. Highly educated states, cities became more educated. People with degrees, people with high levels of education flocked there. Industries moved there. Probably best bet is this is the rise of a knowledge economy, that it Basically, maybe a traditional manufacturing plant you want to put someplace with plenty of space and relatively low wages, but if you're a high-tech company, you want to be someplace that has a deep labor market of highly skilled people and a lot of firms that can provide support, lots of knowledge spillovers. And so that shows clear divergence. And the other thing, which is much more sort of tragic, if you like, is that you have a big left behind issue. It's really stark. What we tend to do, and this partly Ed Glazer's work, but if we look at, always a problem with maps of the United States, by the way, which is that there are what look like large areas, but there's nobody living there, really. But if you look at, this is not sexist, it's just that the societal norm still is that a man in his prime age should be working. But we have large percentages of men not working, primarily, and this was Glazer and Summers, in the eastern heartland, sort of Appalachia and its edges, but just in general. And so you have big coastal metropolitan areas have very high labor force participation among adults in their prime working years, but a lot of people not working. And I think Robin's going to talk a little bit about some of the social issues that arise from that, but just this huge divergence. And so in a different way, we've gone back to the kind of divergence that originally created the division into a wealthy manufacturing core and a poorer, less developed periphery, at least within the United States, to some degree within Europe. The big question is, we've actually had possibly a revolution in the conditions that dictate economic geography just recently. So we had the pandemic, lots of ways in which that COVID defied everybody's expectations on almost everything. And some things have gone back to the way they were before, but a fair number of the participants in this conference are not here, which we might have been able to do 5 years ago. The technology was basically there, but it was not something we did. And the pandemic led to a huge rise in remote interactions, which is an infant industry phenomenon. It turns out that once people had learned to do a lot of work by Zoom, many of them stayed with that, even after fear of contact receded. And it turns out and what we are still trying to figure out what that means. There were many people who thought that this would lead to the death of cities. Why be in an expensive, congested metropolitan area when you can do work from anywhere? That's clearly turning out to be greatly exaggerated. And we don't yet know whether it's going to increase or reduce the concentration of income in already wealthy areas. It could go either way. It's on the one hand, it's certainly possible to live someplace remote and work. On the other hand, it's also possible to provide what were previously local services from a centralized location. So it may be that somebody sitting in the New York metropolitan area will be doing stuff that was previously had to be done by somebody who was on site in the middle of the United States. So it may cut both ways. So far, there seems to be a pretty clear, internal structure of cities has changed. There appears to be a donut effect where people have moved somewhat out from the center cities, although we don't know if that lasts either. But it's I think the main lesson to make here, so I don't actually have a prediction about what's going to change, except that what the history of economic geography tells us is that the trends are not monotonic. If you think that history always moves in one direction, that's not right. We had a period from the mid-19th century till around the 1920s, which was one of increasing concentration. We had another trend from the 20s till around 1980 of decreasing concentration, then a return to concentration as the technologies of communication, the technologies of production changed, and always want to be thinking about what comes next. It's kind of gratifying for those of us who started by writing a lot about economic concentration to discover we weren't only writing about the distant past, we were also writing, as it turned out, unknown to ourselves, we were writing about the present. But future? It's going to be really interesting to see. And I don't know if we will have a chance to talk about this at all, but there is this question, this very agonizing question of what to do about all of those darker colored areas where lots of people that have just been left behind and where there just isn't work for a lot of prime-aged adults. I'll stop it there.
Well, we have a conversation at the end. Okay. That's the way we kind of work together. Yes. Okay. Are we live? Okay. First, I want to start by thanking Dr. Courtitte so much. She's worked so hard and so detail-oriented, and I've just been amazed at her energy and conscientiousness, and this is from somebody who's pretty conscientious myself. No. But thank you, and please understand what hard work she's put into this, and how happy Paul and I are to be here. We've never been to the Azores before, and this is my first regional science talk. So I want to kind of shift a bit the paradigm, and both in terms of exactly what we're talking about, but also in the terms of how the work is done. Paul and I actually, I don't know if you know, it's kind of a quiet, secret thing. He has a side gig, which is to write for the New York Times, which is, and if you didn't know as well, we have our every 4-year big drama going on in the United States right now. We have our election. So all of these things, believe it or not, the regional geography, the economics, the New York Times writing, the political drama, they all kind of blend together in our lives and in our work. So I actually wanted to bring some of that to speak to you today. I'm not actually talking about smiling cities or crying cities. I'm talking more about also what Peter mentioned about radicalization associated with geographical areas. So I've got a working title of Stranded Areas, Social Networks, and Mobility Tipping Points. Question, is it stranded areas or perhaps it's stranded families? And to illustrate that, I wanted to again, bring in part of our national drama that's going on right now, and I call it The Tale of Two Vice Presidential Nominees. Okay, if you, oops, my computer seems to have gone down a little bit. So if you are not aware, we have two vice presidential nominees. One is Tim Walz, who is running along with Kamala Harris, and the other is J.D. Vance, who is running alongside Donald Trump. Now, I ask that this map be left up because the tale of these two vice presidential nominees very much tells you a story about the differential effects of changes in the U.S. economy according to geography. So J.D. Vance comes from the area where you see KY, WVA, and Ohio. That was the former industrial area of the Ohio Valley, whereas Tim Walz comes from Nebraska, which you see NEBR, which, as you can see, has virtually very, very low incidence of male unemployment, whereas the Ohio Valley has very high. And just to give you a bit more background, J.D. Vance has written an autobiography where he talks about having grown up in a deeply depressed former industrial area. His grandparents migrated from Appalachia, came to Ohio in order to work in steel mills. As his grandfather worked, the steel mill started to decline, eventually closed, and J.D. Vance grew up without a father, with a mother who was often drug addicted, and with many others in his cohort never having a good model of how to actually work. So he writes about this in his autobiography, where an entire region not only loses the source of work, it loses the culture of work, and families break apart, and drug addiction becomes endemic. Contrast that with Tim Walz, who grew up in Nebraska, also had some family tragedy. His father died when he was quite young, but he grew up in a community where most men were employed. When his father died, he had a community to fall back on. He said the community that he grew up in was so small that it was very hard to find a date because all of the girls were cousins. So I just wanted to illustrate that this very much is become part of the political fabric of the contest that now is going on, as Peter mentioned, is actually a radicalization of this deprivation that has become intergenerational and has become endemic to particular areas. Now, let's return to economics. Let's return for a minute to economic geography. And I just want to also mention that one of the great conundrums in economics, all economics, is how to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty and deprivation. And, you know, it's important to understand that this intergenerational poverty takes place in a particular place, in a particular time, in a particular set of people, in a particular set of networks. Networks are intimately embedded in space. So what I want to talk about is some research which hopefully can start to allow us to understand the mechanisms behind this intergenerational transmission in space of poverty, and then how that we break it. How we might go from some place like the environment in which J.D. Vance grew up in to the environment in which Tim Walz grew up in. So the work that I'm going to talk about actually is drawn from A recent paper by Raj Chetty of Harvard. It's now a July 2024 NBER working paper. And Raj Chetty, if you're not familiar with his work, uses large data sets to study intergenerational mobility. And he finds that, he's looking for the underlying mechanisms that generate rapid change by race and class in recent decades. And of course, this is somewhat consistent with Paul is talking about, because he's talking about the divergence having reappeared in the US, and of course that's very much transmitted intergenerationally within families. So what he says is that what they find is that for white children born between 1978 and 1992, so this is when, Paul says the switch would have already occurred in the US, so you're starting to see the manifestations on the children. Earnings from high-income families grew, but fell for children from low-income families. The gap, according to parental income, which Chetty calls the class gap, grew by 30% for white children. So this is saying that children experienced a decline relative to their parents, and that gap grew by 30% during that period. Meanwhile, the race gap fell for black children in the US, by black we mean African American, of all parental income levels. These changes in the class and race gaps persisted for other types of non-monetary income, such as educational attainment, test scores, and mortality rates. And what Chetty and his co-authors do is they trace these divergent trends in economic mobility to differential changes in childhood neighborhood environments. So we're back to economic geography because we're talking about place and time. The proxy is parental employment rates, but understand parental employment rates does not necessarily mean the parent of the child. It means adult employment rates in that neighborhood, what I might call approximate role model. So a parent doesn't have to be the role model. The parent of a peer can be a role model. In that case, I call it approximate role model. So he says that outcomes improve across birth cohorts for children who grow up in communities with increasing employment rates. There are larger effects for children who move to these better communities at an earlier age. And there's a particularly strong effect exerted by employment of a parent of a child's peer. Okay? So it doesn't have to be your parent. It is the parent of a peer in which you have a social interaction for. And I also want to mention, it's not in this particular paper, but I've seen it in previous papers like Raj Chetty, that this effect is not symmetric across genders. Male children are more vulnerable to both the downside of high levels of unemployment in a neighborhood, and therefore are also boosted more by increasing levels of employment in a neighborhood. So all of this is suggesting that the deep mechanism here is social interaction at a neighborhood level, and that it is important to also understand the gender dynamics going on behind. So what Chetty says is community-level changes in one generation can propagate to the next generation, not necessarily through the same family line, but proximal, and thereby generate rapid changes in economic mobility. Okay, let me just take a moment to have a sip. Yeah, I'm good. So a couple of observations. One of these is, it explains, although it doesn't mean that it's correct, an underlying emphasis when we are thinking of ways to resuscitate or to encourage development in backward areas is to think about manufacturing. And I want to offer that we think about manufacturing blue collar because it is associated typically with male associated jobs. And that this is the deeper, this is a underlying vulnerability. It's not just for women, it's women also suffer from it, but the critical, the larger effect tends to be on men. And you might be familiar with the work now on deaths of despair in the United States, whereas the largest cause of death among working age whites, it's higher for males than it is for females, are deaths of despair. That is through drinking, drugs, suicide, gunshot wounds, and the like. Now, this also has a question of what do we do? In some areas, as Paul was mentioning, it may be impossible to bring back manufacturing. However, we can also ask, is there a way to loosen this with other government-mediated functions? And one thing I'm thinking about is that in West Virginia, which, as you can see from the map, is a deeply distressed area with very high levels of deaths of despair, the greatest employer there is not manufacturing, it's not coal mining anymore, it's hospitals, it's social work. And this is, of course, government-mediated functions. Will that enable, will that provide the kind of proximal role modeling for people, for young people in those areas, particularly if some of those jobs tend to be associated in people's minds with gender roles? Now, I can't say how strongly it is an issue in Europe, but in the US, it's still an issue. We don't live in a gender-blind world in these areas. And so can we encourage a kind of opening up of the possibilities in these areas, given that young men, boys, are so much at risk from these effects? Also, this work indicates that there's a strong tipping point effect, that the decline in employment leads to diminished mobility of neighborhood children. And again, this is giving a strong rationale for intervention to support employment or similar role-generating interventions. This also indicates why income support alone may not work for impoverished communities. Okay? What this work tends, in my mind, to indicate, it's not the income support, it's the role modeling. Therefore, the income support needs to be effected in a way that creates good role models, particularly for young boys. I think an interesting illustration of this is we see the differing dynamics within immigrant communities depending upon the level of work engagement of men, not necessarily women, of men. So I'm thinking much in the case of many of the immigrant communities in the United States come from Central and South America, whereas men tend to do much of actually work quite a bit, even if they're undocumented, and they're doing often very labor-intensive jobs, maybe not paid very much, but it is giving a step up, it's giving a role model to their children, who are then starting to experience high levels of mobility. Whereas if you bring immigrants, allow them into the country, but you don't give them the ability to work. I know that this is now an issue in the UK. I don't know so much about the rest of Europe. If you don't give them the ability to work, you're actually diminishing the mobility and creating further problems for those communities. This also speaks to the problem associated with lumpiness in a population distribution across the country. As Paul was saying, the US is very lumpy. There are large regions where there are very few people there. Also, great areas of former industrial concentration. The US is not alone in this. The north of England is also an example of this. East Germany is also an example of this. But as I'm just mentioning, it's not necessarily geographic. You know, Sweden, I know, has had a problem recently of integrating its immigrant community, although they are located right in the middle of technologically advanced economy. And I would say to them, are the men working? Can we find ways to, no matter what they are doing, are they working? Are they nurses? Are they school guards? Are they, traffic wardens? To create a way of integrating the men into the society. So I've just gone a little bit with this work, and I've come up with a little bit of a term, which is, I call the density of proximal role models. And proximal role models are role models that are not necessarily in your family, but they are proximal enough to exert an influence over you. And so here we're talking about a tipping point where if the density of proximal role models falls too low, the culture, and this is what J.D. Vance talked about when he talked about the decline of the area that he came from, the culture of working becomes unknown and unavailable, and it's extremely hard to escape from. One more thing I wanted to add before I start to wrap up. We talked about various ways of bringing economic development to stranded areas. And one we talked about is tourism. Associated with that is second home phenomenon that you see. People, having, we see it in the Hudson Valley of New York. People going from New York up to what had been economically distressed areas along the Hudson Valley, but moving up there because it's very beautiful. The problem with just thinking in terms of that is how is the role modeling happening? If you're just transplanting people, rich people to poor areas or poor areas to rich people, are they interacting in a way? Is there, so that the role models, the access to this culture of work and achievement and mobility is actually happening? Okay. I think I'll stop there. Do you have?
Okay, no. Yeah. Robin asked me here because she thought we might need a dialogue, but I'm not sure I have anything to add. I just said one thing though about the social. There's the social issues in the United States. I'm old enough to remember, when we thought of social problems as inner city problems, and especially non-white. And there's a classic work by William Julius Wilson called "When Work Disappears," who said, at that time a lot of people said, "Oh, they're cultural issues," and he said, "No, it's not culture. What happened was that as industry moved out of city centers, they left men largely black men, stranded. And that became the cultural problems. And if you wanted to do a highly unethical human experiment, you would say, let's take a completely different group of people, like, say, rural white people, and take away the jobs for men, and see if they develop a lot of social problems. And that's accidentally what we did. And this map, which shows men not working, is also a map of deaths of despair. They're almost perfect overlap. So, my point, however, is that what you don't think of is that these social things are actually, they're actually in large part economic geography. William Julius Wilson was really writing about economic geography and how it can affect our lives. And not always, I actually talked about this is a problematic, the problems are much more than just economic. And I'm being a little incoherent myself here, but anyway, I'm not sure why I'm up here, but you got the point.
Well, I also wanted to say that, yeah, it's much, much harder to recover once that culture of work has been eradicated. It takes deep and quite extensive intervention. So it is better to, of course, catch it before it gets to that point. And I want to say that I'm not saying that women don't have an effect, the mothers don't have an effect on the intergenerational mobility of their friends' children, but that it's clearly it's more critical for men and for boys.
Once again.
Oh, okay.
I think later on the questions. First Carlos, and then later on they will come back. They will come back.
Okay.
Great.
It's okay. Okay, 20 minutes up. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for this kind of invitation. Thank you to Earth Organization, Peter, Karima. Congratulations for your impressive job. It's a great honor to deliver this conference after Professor Krugman and Professor Wells. I want to deliver an overview during 20 minutes on my research work based on the detection of city patterns for examining the best conditions for improving the quality of life. And in this way, we wanted to develop a new relationship between the urban and territorial space and the different uses of time. Urban for high-density zones, territory for medium and low-density zones. I wanted to explain how could we have detected the influence and the power of this new relationship between space and time based on a distributed, decentralized, polycentric proximity for cities and territories. I have started this research in 2010, 14 years ago. Today, this concept, the 15-minute city, has become a very popular worldwide. However, Peter said, the 50-minute city, 10-minute city, 25-minute city, 30-minute city, X-minute city is not a target itself. This is a framework. This is a framework for examining the past of our cities, the present of our cities, and to propose the different lifestyles, work styles for improving the quality of life. This is the reality of our research work. I have wrote this scientific piece. I was very impressed by the influence of the impact. But the most important, in my opinion, is at the same time how this reflection on the new relationship between space and time for improving the quality of life has this worldwide impact for generating a new topic, proximity, polycentric cities, polycentric territories around the world. In reality, the rise of the X-minute city is the rise of this development for transforming today, for acting now, in order to improve this quality of life. And for understanding my research work, I am a mathematician and computer scientist. I'm not architect or neither urbanist. For 20 years, my research was oriented for using mathematics and computer science for understanding the essential patterns in cities based on the definition of the quality of life and to detect the invariant for obtaining a real quality of life in our cities. But this research work needs a permanent dialogue of the local governance, mayors, president of metropolises, president of regions. And this permanent dialogue with the mayor of the C40 cities, with the institution in charge of cities as United Nations, Habitat, UCLG, etc., has offered this possibility for developing with the proximity a methodology, a path, a trajectory, a roadmap for improving our quality of life in a complex world, in an uncertain world, where we need absolutely to reconcile sustainability in order to have a real success in face with the global threat of our civilization, climate change. And at the same time, to propose a new ecological, economical, and social positive impact in a low carbon way for improving our quality of life. For a long time, we have considered that this way are opposite, to decarbonize and, on the other hand, to reduce our capabilities for industries, for factories, for employment. Today, we have created with UN Habitat, C40 Cities, UCLG, the Global Observatory of Sustainable Proximity, and this is an amazing possibility for observing the impact of this concept, for having a real social for 3 years. A very important program driving urban transition, sustainable future for cities, with this item, the 15-minute city transition pathway. This is the call for proposal with cities, academic researchers, stakeholders, in order to evaluate the condition for implementing this concept. In April, our colleagues have published the first document with more than 100 experiences in Europe for that. We need to understand that even if I have the honor to lead this global movement, this is in reality a movement that exists for a long time. And this movement exists at the same time that our cities were transformed by the predominance of automotive, of cars, by the segmentation, zonification, urban segregation. At the end of the 19th century, a President Award has proposed the Garden City. George Simmel, at the beginning of the 20th century, in 1903, proposed this idea is not enough to have a roof for living in a city. Until recently, my contemporary good friend, Jan Gehl, the Danish urbanist, with his motto, Cities for People. And of course, at the center, the unforgettable Jane Jacobs, when she proposed in the 60s, 70s, this concept of living city that is a permanent source of inspiration. A lot of people evoke the danger of the social segregation by the 15-minute city, the question of the control of people in a reduced perimeter. I wanted to say that a few weeks in Bolivia, in South America, I discussed with the colleagues at the University of La Paz, San Marcos, ethno-anthropologists, and they said, Carlos, your proposal, in fact, in this way of the humanistic urbanism is correlated to this broken femur. And I said, you're right, the broken femur is very, very famous because the American anthropologist from New York, Margaret Mead, said in a radio program when a student asked, what is the first sign of civilization? She said, the first sign of civilization is a femur that has broken and then healed. Healed because someone has collaborated for take care of this person. And Margaret made this collaboration and mutual care are in the DNA of civilization. For healing this broken femur, we need a real contact. We need a proximity. We need to develop a collective, a common collaborative actions. And this is an evidence today for our roadmap with the 15-minute city. With the United Nations Human Habitat, we said housing is not just a roof. This is today, George Simmel, at the beginning of the 20th century, revisited. We said housing does not mean only living in the city. Living in the city is to access to health, to inclusion, to dignity, to safety. In one word, to having access to a real happiness and well-being. This is the real sense of this concept. Jean Jacob said the point of cities is to have every time, everywhere, a multiplicity of choices without to take a car. For that, we need to consider a new urban and territorial framework and to explore this different relationship between the urban space and the useful time. The X-minute city, the happy polycentric proximity in cities and territories, in reality is a way for reconciling the ecology, economy, and social impact. This is the real sustainability, more livable cities for a positive ecology, more viable cities with the economy with employment, with the added value, a more inclusive city for a positive social impact, regenerating our natural resources, relocating the economy in proximity, and reweaving social links. The 50-minute city, in fact, is based on this idea that we need to love our neighbor. We need, in fact, to rebuild the social inclusion, the local economy, and the low-carbon activities block by block. This is today a reality. This is a reality because we don't have a choice. We have, during the 20th century, developed this tremendous gap with the economical inequities. But at the end of the 20th century, and accelerated after the beginning of the 20th century, we have developed with the urbanism two new injustices. The spatial injustice with the building in the bad conditions so far in order to develop naturally these urban segregations, and the temporal injustice because we have punished people that live so far in the bad urbanistic and architectural conditions to spend a lot of time just for going from home to a job. We have accelerated these social exclusions. In fact, the main pattern of modern cities around the world is this social vulnerability with the economic equality, spatial injustice, temporal injustice. We went with Catherine Gall recently to the USA. We discussed with the colleagues of the Argonne National Laboratory, the Illinois Institute of Technology, and they have developed this paper, this research with this recent paper, for examining, in the case of the USA, the different impact of the social, economical, and ecological segregations in the USA, in particular for alone women, for the black people, for undereducated people. But this is present, this pattern, in a lot of different cities in all continents. This is my city, Paris, a wonderful city, one of the most beautiful cities. What is the geography of the economy in my city? This is the reality. The employment is, in particular, oriented to the west of the city. We have today, at the same time, the isochron of people that was constrained for going to the west for working. Automatically, people that don't live in the west have immediately punished with the isochron for more than 1 hour, 2 hours. Where people live in Paris? In the west, the rich people. In the east, the social housing, in the popular district, in the overcrowded buildings. This is the real segregation in our cities today. This is the case in Paris. In the northeast of Paris, the rate of social housing for people with low incomes have reached until 42%. In the west of Paris, where live the richest people, 2.2%. This is the reality of the segregation in our cities. We have explored a lot of different cities around the world. in the global north, in the global south. And in fact, this triple injustice, economical inequality, urban segregation, and temporal segregation, in reality, is a repetitive pattern. This is a digital exploration of the city of Toulouse. This is the middle city in the south of France. In blue, this is the historical center of Toulouse. Good, right, perfect. We have a lot of different services, etc. 10 kilometers after, 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers. The color turned for being red. Only for housing, without services. This is the concrete demonstration of the impact of this temporal and spatial urban segregation, and the political consequences of the poor people, the people undereducated, the people with the low incomes, vote for the extreme, far right, far left. This is the case in Toulouse, this is the case in France. This is the capital of the country where I was born, Bogota, Colombia. 9 million of inhabitants. The pattern is the same pattern. In the southwest, the informal settlements, people undereducated, low incomes, the rate of unemployment. At the opposite, in the northeast, people overeducated, people with the employment because the corporate district is in the northwest. What is the pattern of the isochrones? For accessing to a job, for accessing to education, for accessing to health, for accessing to entertainment and culture. In orange and red. In this informal, in this popular, in these overcrowded districts. More than 90 minutes, even more than 120 minutes. The question is not to develop more and more mobilities. The debate in Bogota is we need 2 metros and more buses. No. This is the isochrone of the mobility. This is not a surprise. The big mobility, the big commute from the southwest towards the northeast. Because we have this economic equality, temporal and spatial injustice. We need more education, more schools, more high schools, more university, more local employment, more short to seek, more medical services, more cinemas, theaters, etc. This is the reality of the segregation in our cities. And we could continue to deploy in Africa, in Asia, in a lot of different places when we wanted to examine the databases for developing this pattern. The 15-minute city, in fact, is in a way in a humanistic urbanism for developing inclusivity, for fight against segregation. This is not only for reduce our carbon footprint. This is for developing more social interactions, more vibrant neighborhood, and for developing a new urban economic model decentralized in the different districts. These are the essential principles: proximity to essential services, organic density, mixed uses, quality of the public spaces, efficient public transportation for interconnecting people, active low carbon mobility on foot or by bike, inclusivity and ubiquity. In reality, we wanted to answer to this question: in what kind of city we want to live in face with climate change, in face with traffic jams, in face with mineral cities, overcrowded public transportations, the new pandemic, the former business model of the mall totally on human. We wanted to change the pattern of the cities, given that we continue to live with the same pattern after the emergence of cars in 1933. We have shaped our cities by three materials: cars, oil, and cement for building. After Le Corbusier, I explained in my latest book, the paradigm was the city that succeeds is one that moves faster and further. And this pattern, this is the worldwide pattern after the Second War. I explained in my latest book. I explored the 5 continents. I explored a lot of different cities, metropolises, middle cities, even small cities. This is the same pattern. The same pattern is the separation of the social functions. To consider that it is normal to live in the long distances. Richard Sennett, the long distances were the normality, when the density and proximity should be an added value. This is the pattern of the west and the east of Paris, the corporate business district, La Défense. This is the pattern of Buenos Aires. We have the same pattern. This is the pattern of Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia. I studied Ulaanbaatar, I studied Mongolia, the lowest density in the world. More than half the population of Mongolia live in Ulaanbaatar. And this is no more the traditional habitat in the nomadic people, but the corporate district and the different favela, slum, etc., with the same pattern: car dependency, fossil fuels, mass transportation, peak hours. After the COVID-19, we have observed this amazing transformation of work. La Défense, the corporate business district in Europe today, is in very, very bad condition with its business model. It's just too close to have under the break-even. This is a great, great opportunity to change our work style. This is one of the key of the success of this proposal. The social circularity with more habitability, the short to low carbon distances in a polycentric city, and we have proposed this social circularity with one color for each one of essential human functions: to live, to work, to supply, to care, to learn, and to enjoy. And 3 new indicators of the quality of life: my personal well-being with my family, my sociability with my neighbor and my work colleagues, and my sustainability, my footprint, and my otherness. We have proposed the rainbow of the high-quality citizen life, a trajectory, a roadmap based on the new local urban plan for mixing these colors. For a long time, for 19 years, we have accepted the separation of colors. We wanted to develop this mixity, not only the functional mixity, but as well this social mixity. As mathematician and computer scientist, I have developed this expertise in the ontologic model. In reality, the core of the 15-minute city is not just the 15. This is not important in reality. The core is an ontologic model for offering a knowledge tree of the 6 essential functions, for offering a precise view of each one of the 6 functions: users, services, equipments, infrastructures, and time of frequentation. For that, we have developed this methodology with the quantitative exploration, mathematics, geodata analysis, statistics, and the qualitative work for involving citizens in these transformations. This is the methodology with the geospatial data analysis in a multi-scalar study for offering the new high-quality societal life variables by my city, by my districts, by my neighbor, until my street. We have developed the mathematical computer scientist indicators for offering, based in science, the diagnostic of my city, and for offering a new trajectory, a new roadmap for transforming. And we have developed this idea of the adaptive isochron because the needs are not the same for a couple, for a family, for a student, for a retired, etc. We have developed the inhabitant profiles. We have developed the new tools using artificial intelligence for the adaptive perception of users of the public space. We have developed the inference rules for measuring the intention for having a better quality of the public space. And we have developed the creative workshop for involving the inhabitants in each one of different zones with the concrete people for creating this new narrative. In my research, I am inspired by my friend, the Nobel Prize Mohamed Yunus, when he published in 2010 his wonderful book, Zero Carbon, Zero Poverty, Zero Exclusion. And of course, Peter have explained the new economic geography of Paul Krugman, because I am totally convinced that we have a big opportunity for having a level de granularity, the cities, neighborhood, district, even a street, in order to develop this new economic geography of the sustainable proximity, for offering more social mixity, more functional mixity, for having more happiness, for having more well-being. This is a vision, this is a framework, this is not a target itself. This is a methodology with a lot of different implementation. Of course, I'm very proud because my city, Paris, has adopted this concept, and today the city of Paris has voted for the next 15 years the new local urban plan, the bio-climate local urban plan, for deploying in our city this roadmap: nature as common good, affordable housing, low carbon neighborhood, environmental health, urban identity, hyper-proximities, and resilient city. This is my real victory to transform a city as Paris in order to be in a way for the next 10, 15 years with this way. And of course, this is the end of this keynote, because I have a lot of other illustrations around the world, in the global north, in the global south, in the big cities, in the small cities, even ruralities, that how could we develop this happy proximity. And I am totally convinced, how could we develop this new economic geography for a sustainable proximity. Thank you, Paul, for inspiration. Thank you, Robin, and thank you for your attention.
So, before we go to the panel discussion, we received a few questions, but we cannot handle them all. So we selected a few, and I would like to invite Carlos Azone. Carlos? Where can I find Carlos? Carlos. Carlos has a question. No, Carlos, not Carlos Moreno, Carlos Azone. Later on, Carlos Moreno. Carlos, can you please come here, because I don't have a mic, and we can use this mic, I think. Sure. So very short and concrete.
Okay.
You can choose.
Thank you very much for three wonderful presentations. And I have a consideration that I'll put to the three speakers, because it affects the three ideas. So although no one spoke about smiling cities and crying cities, but we know that there are crying cities with smiling people inside, and there are crying people in smiling cities, and that, especially in developing countries, Professor Moreno mentioned mostly developed country cities, like except for Bogota. But in third world cities, there is an increasing share of poor people, or crying people, if we might say, and a process in which of social unrest that makes rich people move away to and build fortresses or walled fortresses to be protected for the social unrest and violence and insecurity. And at the same time, the poor are pushed away from the center because of price of land, and mostly sometimes government-driven projects that put them far away. And at the same time, this social unrest and this process is leaving every time more people behind. And with social network and all this, the new technology, we know that political unrest is increasing. And in almost every country, we see people very
short question.
So the idea is that for the future, how those changes, this increasing social unrest, may influence livability, may influence convergence, and may influence the possibility of people learning with their peers. Thank you.
To whom? To whom?
To the three of them.
Okay. Do we have a mic here? Do we have a mic? Do we have a mic? Okay. Hello. Okay. You said to anyone, I would like to invite Professor Krugman.
Okay, I can't. Unfortunately, I don't know developing world cities. I can't really address this. I do want to say that, Robin and I live in something that is, for us, very close to a 15-minute city. That is certain parts of, and what it, the, just, I think just my point about so New York, obviously I know, and I'm a little bit of a New York patriot, but what people do not, there's a mythology. People still envision it as the kind of dystopian, dangerous landscape, and it is really, really not. The reality is, there was a recent article that actually one of the remaining conservative newspaper in the city, but it's actually said, you have almost no chance of being murdered in New York, because the homicide rate is extremely low and now almost entirely involves people you know. What we actually have gotten now is, we don't quite know how we did it, but we actually have remarkable safety. And people are moving out because housing is too expensive, but other than that, it's okay.
Thank you. There was another question. Daniela Constantine. Where can I find Daniela? Daniela. I cannot find her. Oh, hi. Okay. Very short, please, because we still have a panel. Daniela? Very short.
Yes, I will try to be short, as you said.
Stand me next to me.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So many thanks to all speakers for their great presentation, so inspiring for all of us.
Louder.
Okay. my question is particularly addressed to Professor Carlos Moreno. Professor Moreno, as you mentioned in your presentation, and as all of us can notice, many neighborhoods, many local communities are confronted with the challenges generated by cultural and social economic diversity, which many times is combined with the so-called spatial fragmentation among public facilities, which generate a stratification of livability. So my question for you is, what is your view on the effectiveness of the current solutions envisaged in this respect from the perspective of the implementation of the 15-minute city paradigm or X-minute city paradigm?
Thank you very much, Daniela. So Carlos Moreno, very short, please, because we still have a panel.
Yes, but my point of view is very well known. I consider that the question is not to have or not a car. The question is the use of a car. In particular, in the compacted zone, the historical center, in the high-density zone, we don't need a car. We need to offer a lot of different services, public transportation, walkability, bikeability. A car is at the same time very dangerous for the urban health. Not only by the CO2 emissions, by the emission of fine particles, 1.5, 1 point. This is the new silent killer. Of course, we need to propose for the low density zones the use of a car. But your question is the individual car. The individual car, of course, we need to transform for the new business model, the car sharing, the on-demand transport, for the collective real time in other. The individual car, of course, is today a real problem as the generation of a lot of difficulties, in particular the use of the public space. 75% in average of a car use the public space. 75% is used for cars, that only 25% of population have a benefit.
Thank you very much. And Robin, you would like also to reply?
I'm replying, I think, perhaps a little bit more to the previous question. I had a thought about developing cities. And I just want to say that I think it's important to realize that, you know, at different levels of development, the objectives, the achievable objectives can be quite different. And I think maybe sometimes the US is more in the developing country category. So I think one way to think about it is that what we may be aiming for is not per se the quality of life, but the potential for children's mobility. And we see this in the United States, as I mentioned, about immigrant communities. They may live at a relatively, I wouldn't necessarily say impoverished, but a low level compared to you know, vastly rich people in the U.S. But there is this belief, which I think is largely true in many of the immigrant communities that are not in severely depressed ghetto-like environments, that there is a potential for mobility for their children. So, you know, I think it may be helpful to think about what are the real practical and pragmatic ways that you can, what are the objectives, you know?
Thank you very much. Oh, no, okay. Last question, Zoltan Gal. Zoltan, where can I find Zoltan? Oh, of course. Okay, very short, please, very short.
Yeah. My question goes to Professor Krugman. And you mentioned a new factor as digitalization. So what extent this digitalization and remote work accelerating this kind of divergence further, or whether this could reverse it by decentralizing economic opportunity. And how do you see these trends in the other side of the world? Because you presented a kind of American-centric view, but in China we can see some concentration and convergence trends as well.
Thank you very much. Zoltan Gal, Professor Krugman. Very short. Later on we will invite you again.
Okay, just I have not updated China. I mean, with 10 years ago, China 2015 looked amazingly like America 1910 in terms of economic geography. I don't know how it's changed. And maybe we can talk some more about, I actually have a few further thoughts about how the digitalization might affect the convergence, and it's complicated, basically is the answer.
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope it's fine for you, Zoltan. So now I would like to invite Eduardo Haddad. We would like to moderate the panel discussion. So, Eduardo, let me get the presentation.
All right.
So, let's say the slides.
Okay, so we'll have 5 different panelists that are going to help us understanding some of quite interesting issues that were raised after these 3 fascinating talks. So we invite Charlotta Melander, Fabio Mazzola, Catherine Gao, Rossella Nicolini, and Abdella Hamdouche. Please join us here at the floor.
Go together.
Yeah.
Shall I do for you?
Yeah. So,
here, I have it here.
okay. Okay, so all in place. So we'll came up with these 2 questions here. We'll start with the first one for all of you to respond quickly and straight to the point. And the first one has to do with inclusiveness. It's an issue that has been raised by our keynote speaker. So that's an important goal of European cohesion, and I might say also for different places in the global north and the global south. And our question is, does a strict application of new economic geography or the new economic geography or X-minute concepts add to the inclusiveness? And if so, why and how? Please, let's start from
2 minutes.
2 minutes each. Let's start here with Catherine. Yeah, we follow them. Yeah. Catherine, go. Yeah, that's
hello, hello. Thank you for the question and thank you for this great afternoon. So my work relates mostly to this concept of urban proximities, so I'm going to respond from that angle more than from the new geographical one. So obviously, from what Carlos just shared with us, the very nature of urban proximities carries from the Latin origin this idea that you want to live in cities where you are together with others. There is something around including and being connected to other people that we believe is an important driver for this aspect of well-being, for finding a purpose and being part of the community, which there are degrees of that depending on where you come, where you are born, whether it's a collective culture or more of an individualistic culture. But however, the concept of X-minute city or urban proximities is aiming at making sure that you don't leave people behind. And there is a global trend towards loneliness. We observe, and there are many research showing that we see across different groups of population that you have people living alone because they don't belong to a group, because they don't have any other connection. And so part of the experimentation that we are looking at with the observatory that Carlos also introduced is collect data points to find out how we could actually help those people, whether they are on the more senior side of the demographic range or more the earlier stages, younger side. So definitely creating those vibrant communities, enabling activities, creating the places for communal activities, which we have many examples of that, is at the heart of that concept.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Fabio, please.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's very, very interesting discussion. And my point of view is a little bit different. I would like to address some more issues related to new economic geography and in general also related to divergence at a more larger level, let's say regional level. Of course, coming from Italy and coming from southern Italy, you know, the core periphery model and new geography can teach a lot. From the discussion, I got the point that it's really important to introduce elements of social elements, especially intergenerational problem inside the new economic geography. Italy has a situation where the two global trends that we are looking at, like on one hand, aging, for instance. We didn't talk about aging, but too much, but of course it's a general problem. It is a problem that is creating a lot of divergence in Italy, and especially in southern Italy. We have recently the governor of the Bank of Italy said that more than 500,000 people left the country. And if you look at more territorial data, for instance, in my region in Sicily, you had about a population in the last 15 years, you have a population like 100,000 people. It's like Syracuse, the fourth city in Sicily, that left the region for the north or the other region. So what I want to say is that we really somehow need, but it was pretty clear from the discussion before, to introduce some kind of distinction of generation. In Italy, we had recently had an increase in employment, but apparently this increase in employment that brought Italian employment at the level of 2008 was completely done by over 65. Firms are trying to employing more older workers because in times of uncertainty it's better for them. And of course this has a counterpart in the moving of young. So talking about inclusiveness at a larger level, we should have inclusiveness for the young people. So I think that new economic geography can be adapted to that, and maybe in the second round I can react on that again.
Thank you for bringing this perspective from Italy. We're going back to Italy, but now from a Spanish perspective.
But not exactly, I would say. I would propose something more in more general perspective. So first of all, I would like to thank you, everybody, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And I would say my reply to this question goes back to three central keywords, in my opinion, that has been proposed during this presentation. One is convergence, the other one is cohesion, and the third one is proximity. So the three of them are not totally independent, they are very, very connected. And in particular, the keywords that move, that comes through when you move from convergence to cohesion is exactly inclusiveness, because this is one of the priority, let's say, that go beyond convergence. You know, in the critique of the convergence study is that, okay, we have the same level of GDP per capita of everybody, but inside this region is really everybody enjoy the same kind of welfare. And this question is really nowadays extremely actual, because not only young, but also aging of population. So you have retired people that are losing jobs, unemployed, immigrants, legal immigrants, illegal immigrants. So we have several points. And so what has been evocated also, the potential peers effect that can stem in city, in town, in regions, can be a way in order to overcome the cultural fracture, the cultural divisions, the social, economic division. But at this point, this is not something magical. So I would like to put another question in these points. If we trust in peers effect, if we trust in other initiatives that can take place and help to cohesion, these pass through the interaction of agents, any kind of moment interaction of agents. And therefore, how we can make agents interact in a society in which Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are the striking feature and the way to drive if people don't meet. And indeed, there was citation of a paper contribution by Chetty. Chetty also has this fantastic database on Facebook in the United States. And it's really important to understand that people does not interact in the same neighborhood, but they can also interact across states. So the issue of to take into account how the standard kind of framework of analysis can contribute to the questions, to me, pass through the way how we can make or understand how people can interact.
Okay, these are very interesting points. So, Charlotte, please.
Charlotte Melander.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Thank you so much for the great presentations to start with. I think my take is slightly different. I've spent the last 25 years trying to understand cities in my research, but outside of my academic work, I've spent even more time trying to understand what will happen with all places that are being left behind, especially from a Swedish context. And I've visited most of those places over the last 15 years. And from outside, I always have this perspective that these people are stuck in those places. And that is not the case when you go out there. They love their places. They remember the places the way they used to be. I mean, obviously they suffer from the population decline, schools are closing, the police has moved away a long time ago, and they feel like they have been abandoned. So here I'm sitting listening to all those presentations, and especially the 15-minute city, and I'm thinking that this may not be an urban theory. It may actually be a rural theory. Because what many of those people say is that, oh, if we only were certain we would keep the school, or if we could only be sure that the police would come when we call. So I'm thinking maybe this would be a rural theory of a 45, 60-minute rural area. What can people expect if they live outside of cities? And that this would be a policy opportunity to pick up, like to actually make sure that some basic services provided by the public is assured in many of those areas, to make sure that those who still love those places are able to stay there.
Now, Abdelillah Hamdouche, please.
Thank you very much. I will take another angle. I've been very interested, especially in the fact that now I'm sure that the social issues are back in the economics, okay, and there are serious matters over there. So I've been working on innovation, hard innovation, regional development, clustering dynamics, and so on. And 15 years ago, I turned to social and institutional innovation as key entries for understanding how territories change, and especially cities over there. And then what is important about social innovation especially is the fact that we changed completely the approach with many research projects with the European Commission by taking this entry of what is going on the field. Let's look at the problems, the issues, and how eventually these problems have been solved. And we discovered a huge potential of local innovation dynamics that inspired at more institutional level, that inspired new policies. And I was surprised through the three presentations not hearing a lot about the role of policies. Why did we end into this bunch of problems in France as well, the Gilets jaunes and so on? Today, everywhere, my idea is that there is a certain responsibility, not only from the part of researchers, but from the part also of policymakers and decision makers. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to the next round, and that's a very important issue so that we can reach our young regional scientists. So we saw that many issues, a rich range of novel research has been unfolded, and new challenge for regional science, for regional scientists. So quickly, please mention just one concrete actionable research project or topic to be undertaken to address some of the challenges that were raised. So please.
So my response to this is actually piggybacking on what was just said. Carlos presented the Driving Urban Transition Scheme, which I'm sure many of you in the room are maybe part of or have applied to. And this is one kind of research scheme that really can make a difference because it's bringing together city, and we talked about it 2 days ago, it's important to equip city people with that sort of knowledge, science-based insights. But then you have scholars like all of us here, and also the private sector and the policymakers. And so it's the only way we are going to see how we learn from experiment and how we can then replicate some of that. So if there is a set of program where I would encourage all of you to apply and maybe talk to us because we are connected to many cities, this is that sort of program that really has a huge impact on the future of how we are going to organize and develop the policy for cities.
Fabio?
Yes, I move on what I said before. I think a very important issue would be to include at least 2 generations of people inside the new economic geography. But there is another point that I would like to mix with that, and was raised by one of the questions, that is the fact that the digital transformation, in a sense, may give the possibility of more centrifugal approach. So I think the power of new economic geography is really to put together centripetal and centrifugal forces and see how they go. So the interplay between these two, I think, is it may be a fruitful area of research. But I have another one, just very small. It was, in some sense, driven by Professor Wells' discussion about the cultural work. I think I'm very fascinating because, of course, talking about cultural work in Italy is a big issue. So let's say international analysis looking at how the cultural work is important in making distress or development in an area.
Rosella, what topic would you like things being submitted to papers in regional science?
I would say a nice topic is the one stemming from a very nice question. So I would go for, questions that have unanswered nowadays, but maybe they are of the very old questions, and still, I think, for what we have said, for proximity, for interactions, for cohesions, one of the very important things is how to define the optimal spatial unit of analysis. This is something that is unanswered, and nowadays, more than ever, is something extremely relevant to understand for policy actions, for different kinds of initiatives to be taken.
This is the answer from our editor, so Charlotte.
So I'm going back a little bit where I stopped last round. I think there is a huge job to be made to answer the question how to secure quality of life for places in decline. Like, as people move away, how can we still make sure that those who are left there have a decent quality of life? What kind of functions should we provide in those places, and can we provide them, and what kind of trade-offs do we need to make in order to secure this? I think that is it's so important also to avoid polarization in the future, to make sure that those who feel left behind can sort of have some kind of decent quality of life still.
Hamdoush?
For myself, I've been working a lot, and I'm more and more convinced that geography and economic geography should focus more on small and medium-sized towns. I've been working at the European level and in France as well, because their problems and the way they innovate for thinking about their development and solving the problems are completely different from that we could observe in metropolises or large cities. And here you have these connections of proximity we're talking about between different actors, stakeholders that combine their efforts, their knowledge, their experience for finding adapted local solutions to their development. That I am convinced that the new economic geography should also focus on that.
Thank you. So before we conclude, I will pass the mic to our 3 keynote speakers just to wrap up and see what they have to say on it.
Yes, I'd like to wrap up by saying that I agree with the last speaker. I think we need to be careful about the underlying differences and not apply a one-size-fits-all. Whether it's large cities, small cities, whether it's developing countries, whether it's developed countries, or maybe we even have a region within a developed country like the United States that feels like a developing country. So I think we need to be more courageous in our disaggregation, more courageous in looking at the underlying dynamics.
Okay. I actually just want to respond to policies. So here's what, quick thought. If we ask what can we do to restore declining areas, restore them to their former glory, the answer is nobody knows how to do that. If we look for solutions, we're probably going to end up in despair. But making things better, we can do a lot on that dimension. And just to give the rural areas thing, we actually have a bit of a natural experiment in the United States. We're having the declining regions. One of the things that is exactly the kind of thing that Carlotta was talking about, the loss of closing rural hospitals becomes a really big issue. And it is hard to maintain it, but we have a bit of a natural experiment because we had an expansion of Medicaid, the lower income health care program, which some states have opted out of. And rural hospitals are staying open, more of them are staying open in states that have expanded Medicaid. And this doesn't solve the problem, but it certainly keeps life livable more. And so I think if we ask not how do we solve this whole thing, but how do we at least make things better, there's a lot we can do.
Thank you for your definite intervention. I am convinced that the new economic geography is a powerful leverage for revigorating our territories, and the convergence with the happy proximity is a real possibility for offering not a magical solution, but this doesn't exist, but to propose a new methodology, a new framework for thinking differently, for the collective economy, for developing social impact, for developing more low-carbon cities and territories. But this is not the same solution anywhere. We need to customize, and we need to transform in public policy. And the target is, in fact, to contribute to improve the quality of life with a lot of different implementation.
Okay, thank you all. Now, Karima, please.
So before we will wrap this session, so I would like, of course, to thank the panel members, Katerina, Fabio, Rosella, Charlotte, Hamadi. Thank you very much. You can stay, you can stay, you can stay. And before I invite Kingsley and Patricia Mello, is she here? Yes, of course. Patricia Mello, yes, and Kingsley. Before I give them the floor, of course, I would like to thank Peter Nijkamp. Of course, the success of this session is also in collaboration with Peter. Peter, thank you very much. Of course, I would like also to thank Thomas Dentino. He's also very busy. I don't know where he is. Okay. And of course, Roberta Capello supporting us. Very positive. Thank you very much, Roberta. And our guests, Professor Paul Krugman, Professor Robin Wells, thank you so much. Carlos Moreno, thank you so much. Catherine Gall, again, thank you. So I would like to give the floor to Kingsley and Patricia, and after that... Okay. And then, after Kingsley and Patricia, we will have the felicitation and photo session. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been rather exciting, and I would say, very differentiating set of activities we've heard from today, and I think really important. I think one of the things in regional science is we've tended to be focused on regional development in a narrow sense. And one of the things really is important, it seems to me, is the increasing concern about the role of people in an individual sense within the structure and what you do and how your policies affect them. I think the comments that Robin made was really important in terms of targeting that particular area. And it's an area in regional science that we have tended to overlook. So I think it's extremely vital. I think the area that Paul made with regard to the new economic geography is important. Where are the new breakpoints? Can we recognize them? And what do they mean in terms of restructuring the spatial distribution of society in different ways? And I want to really thank the panel for their ability to really jump on a set of questions which were really important, in which they helped us out a lot. Carlos, I think the issue of the 10-minute, 15-minute, 35-minute city is central to a lot of these things that are going on. But it's very, very hard, and a nut that is difficult to crack. But one where there's a lot of positive spillovers that are both economic and social that are vital to all of us. So I thank you all for wonderful activity here and for the audience to enjoy it. And I'm going to turn it over to my...
Thank you very much, Kingsley. I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to say after all of this, hearing all of these contributions, other than thanking everyone, but I'll be very short. Perhaps what I thought from the beginning was quite an unlikely match of speakers, both of them working with distance and proximity, but from very different perspectives. But perhaps what I would highlight is the diversity, which I think it's very close to the heart of everyone working in regional science, with what that might sometimes bring of feeling a bit confused, where do I fit? But I think that's where science ought to be, breaking disciplinary boundaries, but not only disciplinary boundaries, but also, and I think the speakers here were really very good illustrating that, both Paul and Robin, but also Carlos Moreno, that have gone beyond the boundaries of doing science within our academic cabinets. And even yesterday we heard that at the beginning by Elisa Ferreira, also calling for us to do, well, to dare to do that more. So I guess that's probably where I'd like to end, and perhaps add that element of not forgetting our responsibility towards the other people that are not doing science, not only civil society, but the policymakers. To be more activists, I guess I would say. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.